Hey everybody, welcome to Fantasy R&R. This is your host Ryan.
And I'm Rob.
And this is week 8 of Fantasy Football 2022.
This is Fantasy with Rob and Ryan, Fantasy R&R.
We'll get things kicked off with tonight's Thursday night football matchup.
Ravens at Buccaneers.
Call me crazy, but I am sitting Leonard Fournette and Chris Godwin going forward. I have zero trust in this Bucs offense. I don't know what's going on with Fournette. Sharon carries going with Rachaad White. I am very concerned, and when it comes to Thursday night football and the short rest, I am not playing Fournette or Godwin.
Ravens are a run-first team right now. Lamar Jackson, when he tries to scramble, a lot of the times it looks like an ad-lib in the first place. Even some of the designed runs that they have for Lamar Jackson, he tends to get stuffed on those in particular. Without his deep threat Rashad Bateman for most of the year, it seems that he's just going to rely on the trust of Mark Andrews, who is definitely the next Kelsey, can go in the top 15 next year. And for the rest of the season, you're going to see a lot of run-heavy, not pass-heavy offense. And I think that just needs to be considered because there's a lot of people, with the Duvernays, Rashad Bateman. Lamar Jackson is going to be a runner going forward. The Ravens are going to be running going forward. The wide receivers you can sit, the running backs you can start.
Broncos at Jaguars.
Greg Dolce. Never heard of her. This is now one of the new tight ends that everybody's talking about to pick up, roster, and hope for the best. He is now the new Hayden Hurst. Evan Ingram and Robert Tonyan, now all four of them, are walking in a bar together. Greg Dolce, pick him up if you need to, but I am not holding my breath.
The strategy of the waiver wire should definitely vary from league to league. You have to understand who's worth picking up and why. One of the things that was shocking to me is we've seen a litany of injuries in the NFL. Breece Hall going down with the ACL, James Robinson being moved off of the Jaguars. With Etienne having a season-long injury last year, why would JaMychal Hasty be left on the waivers in my league? It's something that's confusing to me when I'm seeing other players picked up and drop like Josh Reynolds. JaMychal Hasty's now been upgraded to 2 behind a guy who's already missed an entire season with an injury. Those are the kind of waiver pickups that you should be looking at in those situations. If you're in way shallower leagues, you can look for somebody that may flex for you. But when you're in a large, deep keeper league, this is the kind of waiver ad you want to make, not necessarily just streaming a new defense every week. So it makes sense to use those strategies in certain leagues and not in others.
Panthers at Falcons.
Kyle Pitts owners, it's time to let go. Time to sell, ladies and gentlemen. Outside of a dynasty league, of course, you're not moving Pitts, I suppose, unless if you need the help. But Kyle Pitts is doing nothing in the stagnant Atlanta Falcons offense. Mariota is somehow still the quarterback. I was about to say running back because that's truly what he is. But Kyle Pitts, if I have him, I'm trading him effective immediately.
Great takeaway from this is fantasy isn't fair. Fantasy doesn't care about your feelings. Look at DJ Moore. He finally goes off the week that the Carolina Panthers have a third-string QB. They've traded away their second wide receiver, Robbie Anderson. They've traded away star running back Christian McCaffrey. There was no reason the offense should have gone off. DJ Moore happens to come down with his biggest game of the season. And that's why, when you truly believe in a player, you can stick them in your lineup. When it's someone that I've repeatedly said, at this point, I just don't believe him anymore, somebody I'm only going to put in the flex when I don't really have a whole lot of other options. But that's why you have those kind of tiered rankings. You got to decide who's worth more than the other guys on your bench.
Bears at Cowboys.
I believe there is a shift change coming in Chicago's backfield. I believe Khalil Herbert is going to be the guy that needs to be owned immediately, especially if you own David Montgomery. I say go get him now. Chicago Bears have already come out and said that he's going to receive more touches, which is always a good sign that things are changing. Khalil Herbert, get him now.
Well, the Cowboys are the number 1 defense in the league, so this is not the best week to talk about this in particular. But Justin Fields is definitely a stash. Now, look at Josh Allen his first 2 years. He was pretty terrible. He was bad with his accuracy. Didn't have a whole lot of touchdowns. He turned over the ball a lot. Rookie QBs need time to develop. Jalen Hurts was scrutinized this same way. And look what he's doing now. Everyone's rushing out to get the top 5 QB in the league last year and this year, and he's taking them potentially to the Super Bowl. Justin Fields may not do it this week, so we got to stop this stuff that ESPN's saying about is he breaking out. No, we saw his talent, Now we got to give him some time to get into that rhythm and consistency. This isn't necessarily the week for it to happen, but for everybody else treating Justin Fields like Jalen Hurts in your leagues, you can easily pick him up for the next 2 seasons.
Dolphins at Lions.
Very similar to that of Greg Dolce, who I've just recently brought up, and then Hurst, Ingram, Tanya, blah, blah, blah. Mike Gesicki seems to be yet another tight end you can pick up and potentially flex. We got Travis Kelce with the bye week this week. Gesicki's worth the look. 14 targets the last 2 games. Tua is now seems to be over the whole concussion thing and is airing out the ball. So Gesicki, you got Waddle, you got Hill. They could use that third option. He might be a good look this week once again with bye weeks coming from the tight end and potentially going forward.
Tua Tagovailoa, hot topic of the NFL this year for his 6 TD passing game and then the subsequent concussion discussion. Right now, he's very low on DFS at $6,200 for salary cap. Much like Joe Burrow last week against the worst passing D in the league, the Atlanta Falcons, now Burrow has climbed in salary in DFS, and naturally, I would not play Burrow over Tua in a DFS league because you want to spread that value around, right? Well, Detroit has bad cornerbacks, so if Tua's going to repeat any multi-TD performances this season, it's going to be this week against Detroit at a value that definitely opens up space for your flex spots.
Cardinals at Vikings.
A proposed question to you. Where in the world is Adam Thielen? He has only scored double-digit fantasy points in 3 of the last 6 games. Justin Jefferson clearly is the guy that Kirk Cousins is trusting in this offense. And I gotta be honest, I think more often than not, I'm either benching Adam Thielen or I'm looking to trade him if you can get somebody that wants to buy him now, and potentially on the low, but definitely benching Adam Thielen as things stand right now.
James Conner is still not cleared for this week, but who cares if he comes back? That's the theme of my take on this. He's not having a great year in the first place and doesn't look like an RB1 even though he was drafted like one. Eno Benjamin might as well be taking carries after this anyway. Obviously, that guy that always takes over the backfield, gets 15, 20 points, everyone gets excited, but much like James Robinson right now, who I'm dumping in a league, I would try to dump off any perceived RB1 status RBs. So if Eno Benjamin's got that perceived RB1 status because he's starting, if James Conner has that perceived RB1 status because he was starting, then this is the time to get rid of them while they still hold that value.
Raiders at Saints.
There's a little blast from the old Fantasy R&R podcast. Juwan Johnson scored 2 touchdowns last week, was 5 for 5, and had 32 yards catching. Andy Dalton is going to be starting again this week, who it seemed that Juwan Johnson, he trusted him in the red zone. I am not saying to run out and go get Juwan Johnson, but very interesting. Let's see what happens going forward with the Saints and Juwan Johnson and Andy the Red Rock Dalton.
Josh Jacobs, why is this man always so overlooked? This is a great point to make and everyone needs to take it to heart. You got to find those guys that make sense for your draft at the position they're in those Yahoo and ESPN rankings. A lot of people are not scrolling down the screen to look at some of these guys. I mean, that's one thing. But, I get more jazzed about Josh Jacobs' talent and production capability than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Fournette, Aaron Jones, Etienne at the beginning of the year, and all these guys were taken before him. Josh Jacobs was falling pretty deep in a lot of these leagues, and I mentioned it repeatedly at the beginning of the season on this podcast. So, to get your value in drafts, it's all dependent on how you feel about that player, not necessarily the ranking that ESPN and Yahoo is giving you. Josh Jacobs is another guy, I think, going into next season, now his value is going to be a little bit higher, and you have to decide, will he return next year, what I got from him this year.
Patriots at Jets.
Just last week, I called the New York Jets the potential diet caffeine-free RC Cola that was the Bengals. I had to pick up Zach Wilson because Josh Allen was on a bye week, and man, did he make me look foolish. What could be interesting is they are playing this Pats defense that just got shredded by the Chicago Bears, who couldn't score points earlier on this year. Maybe this is the week. Maybe not, but it is something to monitor going forward. They just got James Robinson now as their RB1. Those being reported. Again, this doesn't mean much of anything. Elijah Mitchell's supposed to play and start in the slot. Let's see what happens. But Zach Wilson and the Jets proved me right, and I might just upgrade you from RC Cola to Diet Pepsi.
with Elijah Moore and the tweets he was making, not knowing what's going on behind the scenes is a big deal in fantasy football. Look at Cam Akers. When you've got players that grew up in tough situations, are being recruited by everybody to become a multimillionaire talent in the NFL level, we don't know how these guys are going to react in social situations, the things they grew up with, if they're angry guys, if they're not reasonable. If Akers and Elijah Moore are arguing with coaches behind the scenes, it's not a great look for them in fantasy. I dropped Cam Akers right away, and Moore is somebody just steer clear of this kind of stuff, because when the talent level doesn't involve Chad Johnson or Antonio Brown, you don't need to be worrying about whether or not this guy's going to go off this week, or next year. You just stay away from it, and you find somebody on your roster you do believe in.
Steelers at Eagles.
If you've been listening, you know my conundrum with Miles Sanders. Well, Miles Sanders departed my team today. I was able to take Miles Sanders, Leonard Fournette, and Chris Godwin, and I trade all three of them for Austin Eckler. Now, the ideology of this, to me, one is the Fournette carries were concerning me, as I said, the Godwin, the offense being as bad as it has been with the Bucs. But Miles Sanders, and this is the question that Ryan proposed to me, ultimately was saying, well, you believe then those three players equate, 10 points? Because three guys, right, 33% chance of essentially Sanders being what Eckler could be, and I believe that is exactly true. I believe that Miles Sanders' ceiling is more or less 10 points, Fournette at this point 10 points, and Godwin 10 points, equating to what Eckler could potentially average, close to 30, being the RB1 that he is, being the younger guy, and the Chargers offense ultimately has to get going once Herbert is officially healthy. Keenan Allen comes back. They just lost Mike Williams, but it's going to be interesting. It's a fun ride, Miles Sanders. Best of luck to you, but adios.
This is what I was saying before. There are guys you believe in, you just have to believe in it. I traded for Naji Harris. The Steelers' offense is not looking great right now, and Naji Harris is not looking like that 400 touch back with a lot of upside from last year. He doesn't seem to be making much improvement with the offensive line for his YPC, but I gave away James Robinson to do it. The guy gave me Naji Harris and Chris Godwin. I perceive Harris as that RB1. He perceives James Robinson as the RB1. So whether or not it's for this season or a keeper league, I still think that kind of trade is good, and it's something that should be weighed. Maybe you could pull that off in your leagues. I obviously like Naji Harris as a dynasty stash much better than I do as a league winner, but again, I don't think James Robinson is a league winner by going to a new team in the middle of the season. I think he's going to have a couple of good fantasy games, and then he's going to go right back to doing nothing, kind of like Le'Veon Bell did on the Jets.
Titans at Texans.
Something I capitalized on today that we have brought up before is taking RB1 like Derrick Henry and potentially moving him for multiple pieces. And I would have to question whether or not, if I do have Derrick Henry in one of my leagues, and I'm struggling a little bit, and I'm starting to debate whether I do what I capitalized on today by getting Eckler. Do I now move Derrick Henry? And this is the reason why. Ryan Tannehill, Robert Woods, and then who else do you got with the Titans offense? Nothing in particular outside of Derrick Henry, or they're not moving the ball through the air this year. Derrick Henry, I believe, is easily tradable. And you go and you get two or three, either 2 A guys or 3 B guys, and you help out your team. And I'm in that position, and I say do it before he potentially gets injured yet again this season on a very porous Titans offense.
Ultimately, the AFC South is like the old NFC East, but with more wins. Neither team in this game has anyone in the top 10 at their position besides Derrick Henry at running back, and these teams always play each other hard and are difficult to predict. It's one of the reasons I took the Colts to beat the Jags in this last matchup. It's also one of the reasons I keep saying the Jags could still potentially win this division at 7-10 with a losing record like the Commanders did back in the day. And obviously in this game, one of the AFC South teams is going to take a loss again. I don't see any upside here for anybody in a streaming option. Tannehill, Davis Mills, you got to be pretty desperate if that's what's going on. Dameon Pierce is still a fine flex play because he's leading that backfield. But other than that, this is a game left best for DFS, not speculative ads in your regular leagues.
Commanders at Colts.
Earlier this year, Ryan was debating whether or not Jonathan Taylor was going to be worth the number 1 pick, and lo and behold, sir, you are correct, and I'm jumping on this bandwagon. And you, a few weeks ago, getting ahead of your own advice, getting Cooper Kupp is something I don't even feel like you could do right now if you were lucky. What do you do with Jonathan Taylor going forward is my question to you. You look at next year, we're already seeing Matt Ryan being benched, and clearly the Colts are going to have to draft a quarterback. You You don't know what pick they're going to get because ultimately they're still not even that bad of a team, and they're in a division, like you said, that are up for grabs. What does Jonathan Taylor look like going into next year? Are you taking him in the first round? I think it is a very intriguing question, once again, that Ryan proposed to us earlier this year.
The hilarity of ESPN writers and the speculation of downgrading or upgrading always makes me laugh when I see those notifications pop up on my phone or iPad. You know, everyone's saying, why we downgrade Pittman? I think even one of them came from Field Yates, so I really respect and enjoy listening to and watching. But my question here that I would propose is, why would we downgrade Pittman any further than he already is on the season? You know his place on your team. With Matt Ryan being taken out, the Colts clearly think that Matt Ryan sucks more than Ellinger's going to suck. So if Matt Ryan sucked less, he'd be left in to suck the rest of the season, making all of his receivers suck as much as they've sucked all year. This is the perfect time to speculate that maybe there's an upgrade for Pittman, maybe there's hope, maybe there's light at the end of the tunnel. Why would we downgrade him when the Colts are making a specific change at QB in order to jumpstart the offense? We got to get over these silly fantasy takes that are just tired, and you start to get a little bit more strategic about what this all means. I don't think anything changed. I think somebody just had a boring week at the water cooler for news.
49ers at Rams.
Speaking of QBs that are sucking, Matt Stafford is sucking. In the last 3 games, Matt Stafford is averaging 6.2 fantasy points per game, 2 total touchdowns. This is a guy who was in the Super Bowl last year and has plenty of talent around him and is struggling very hard. I believe that Matt Stafford is unstartable going forward. I believe he's easily droppable and potentially the ceiling of like a Justin Fields, who the last 3 games is averaging over 18 points and has 4 total touchdowns, 3 through the air and 1 rushing. And on top of that, in the last 3 games, has a rushing total of 217 yards. So now you got to ask yourself here, are you getting rid of the old guard as Ryan and I have talked about before? Is this the moving on of an old guard and the new guard coming in? I say it's worth the risk. Matt Stafford, unstartable.
I'm sure it was not a shock to see the lackluster performance last week from Christian McCaffrey on the 49ers, but is he just being eased in, or are we in an upcoming nightmare scenario where he's going to be part of that ever-revolving carousel of 49ers running backs, and they're not going to utilize him the same way that the Panthers did? Should you have traded CMC the minute the Panthers did? Do you feel better about being a CMC owner with him on the 49ers, or do you feel worse? That's going to be the poll in this video. You guys can vote on it.
Giants at Seahawks.
Similar to what Ryan's saying about ESPN and everybody else essentially force-feeding you Kool-Aid. I am not drinking the Kool-Aid on Daniel Jones. I truly believe that they just had Jacksonville fooled on a simple, let's just pretend like we're going to pass it to Barkley, have Daniel Jones run the other way, and of course, he has the best game of his career. Guess what? So did Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders had statistically the best game of his career this year against what's appearing to be a very porous Jacksonville defense, especially in the secondary. Daniel Jones, not happening.
The Giants have some trade rumors. They might be looking at Jerry Jeudy, and it's interesting to me that they got rid of a first-round pick, Kadarius Tony, right before that's going to happen. Kadarius Tony, latest news is he's now on the Chiefs. He's off the Giants. And these guys are all starting to become the same thing because they're going from one mediocre quarterback to the next. But with Kadarius Tony, it's different because now he's becoming the Kadarius Tony, going with, a good situation to the Chiefs. They're full of Kadarius Tonys. They've got middling wide receivers at the moment, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Juju Smith-Schuster hasn't made quite the impact this year that people were hoping. Sky Moore has done almost nothing as a rookie. It's quite interesting to see guys like Mecole Hardman and Kadarius Tony all get together on the same team with Mahomes, because I think they're all going to be pretty much untrustable in the fantasy landscape. And if Judy goes to the Giants, it's going to be the same thing there.
Packers at Bills.
Yeah, we're this many weeks deep into the season, and I am just completely giving up on any Green Bay wide receiver going forward. Not saying that you shouldn't be benching them, but starting them is just not an option. Even Tanyan, who barely does anything, is equating to what 2-3 receivers should essentially be doing in Green Bay.
Well, this is probably going to be my game of the week. I think this is going to be a lot closer than other people probably think. the hate Aaron Rodgers gets is interesting right now because he's actually a middle-of-the-pack QB. You got to take these things face value, not what somebody else on the internet saying. The Bills are a tough defense. Yeah, Rodgers' thumb is taped up right now. He might be a little injured, but you want to know something? He's 11-3 on TD to interception ratio on the season. He's on pace for about 25 TDs and 7 interceptions. Not what we normally see from him, but those are like Trent Green-like numbers. He's going to be a good quarterback by statistical standards. But due to the positional ranking he's in a lot of 10 and 12 team leagues, he's technically unrosterable. So people look at him that way because they don't need Aaron Rodgers anymore on their fantasy team. What happens in this game in the NFL is likely what's going to bury Rodgers in the Halloween fantasy graveyard for the rest of the season or going forward in his career. But don't be surprised to see Rodgers put up a performance that gives the Bills a run for their money. He's had a lot of games in a row with multiple touchdowns.
Bengals at Browns.
All right, I added one of my guys, Donovan People-Jones. I added him the last 4 weeks. He is averaging just over 8 points a game, which of course doesn't sound fantastic, but Deshaun Watson's coming back, and potentially, if he can keep his dick in his pants, I believe he could make DPJ the wide receiver 1 in Cleveland.
This game is a good time to bring up a few things about fantasy strategy going forward. I have heard a lot of criticism over the past few seasons of the team monopoly that Stephanie was building in our ESPN league. But, after talking to each other, me and her were deciding, we're going to slowly build up her stash of Bengals because of the immense talent coming into the league. Remember, Mixon was probably the top running back in that draft class till he punched that bitch in the club. So when you've got a roster forming like that, you can depend on them as long as they start to come together as an offense in the NFL. My dad has done it with the Packers in very competitive leagues. He had Aaron Rodgers, Cobb, and Jordy Nelson all at the same time and won a couple of championships. Stephanie won last year. This past week, the Bengals go off, her team destroys. That is a strategy you can use for winning fantasy leagues. The question is, how can you identify those rosters? Obviously, some of us thought maybe it'd be the Chargers this year or just the Rams again with Cooper Kupp and getting Stafford on the same team. But honestly, no one is doing what the Bengals are doing, and it's very interesting. When you put together an entire NFL team on your team, you can have fantasy success like that. It just depends on the team you're picking. And that's going to do it for Week 8 of Fantasy Football 2022. Once again, this is Rob and Ryan with Fantasy R&R. We'll see you next time.